The first time he inspected me, I thought I had done something wrong. We were not married yet, we were not even alone in the house. My mother was less than 20 feet away, working in the kitchen, and I could hear the soft scrape of a wooden spoon against the bottom of a pot. Outside, one of my brothers was splitting wood. Every few seconds, the axe came down. Crack, pause, crack, pause. And I remember standing near the window with both of my hands held out in front of me while the man I was supposed to marry looked at them. Not held them, looked at them, my palms, my fingers, my nails. The calluses along the inside of my thumb. He turned one of my hands slightly toward the light. Then the other. I was 18 years old. I remember wondering what he was looking for, but I did not ask. That was the first inspection. The second one happened 3 weeks later. And by then I understood enough to be frightened. My name is Hannah. I was raised old order Amish, and I spent most of my early life believing that the things adults around me called practical were automatically harmless. That is something I understand differently now. I want to be careful from the beginning. Amish communities are not all identical. Different affiliations, districts, bishops, families, and generations can have very different customs. I am not telling you that every Amish girl goes through what I did. I am telling you what happened to me. And I'm telling you what I was taught it meant. Because sometimes a practice does not need to be written in a rulebook to have the force of a rule. Sometimes everybody simply knows what is expected. And when you are 18 years old surrounded by people you trust, that expectation can feel stronger than any written law. If you have ever had something done to you that everyone else treated as normal while something inside you kept saying, "This does not feel right," you may understand this story. And if you want to hear more of the things women in communities like mine were often taught not to speak about, subscribe. Silence survives because people inherit it. So does truth. The man I was going to marry came from what people considered a good family. That mattered enormously. His father worked hard, his mother was respected, they attended church faithfully, their farm was orderly, their children behaved well in public. Nobody whispered about drunkenness. Nobody whispered about violence. Nobody told my father that I was marrying into trouble. From the outside, everything looked safe. And I want to say this clearly because it matters to what happened next. My future husband was not introduced to me as someone dangerous. He was introduced as someone responsible, reliable, serious, a good provider. Those words carried weight. Our courtship had been quiet. There were visits, family meals, buggy rides, church Sundays where we sat in separate areas but knew exactly where the other person was. There was no dramatic proposal like people imagine in movies. There was an understanding, then a conversation, then families became involved. Once everyone knew we were moving toward marriage, something changed. I did not understand it then. Before that point, I had been a girl being courted. Afterward, I began to feel like something being evaluated. The first sign was small. My mother started talking more about my work, not teaching me, listing it. She mentioned how early I woke, how much bread I could bake, how quickly I could finish mending, how rarely I became sick, how strong I was during harvest. At first, I thought she was complimenting me. Then I realized she was saying these things around his family. My usefulness was becoming part of the conversation. That did not shock me then. In the world I came from, work mattered, everybody worked. Men, women, children old enough to carry something. Being capable was something to be proud of. The problem was not that people cared whether I could work. The problem was how quickly my body itself became part of that assessment. A week after our families had spoken seriously about the wedding, my future mother-in-law came to our house. She sat with my mother at the kitchen table. I was cleaning vegetables. They talked about ordinary things at first. Weather? Canning. A neighbor who was expecting another child. Then his mother asked whether I had ever had problems with my back. I looked up. My mother answered before I could. No. Then she asked whether I had ever fainted. Again my mother answered. No. Headaches? Nothing unusual. Weakness in winter? No. Trouble carrying heavy baskets? No. I stood 3 feet away while 2 women discussed my body as though I were not in the room. Nobody was trying to humiliate me. That is important. They thought they were being practical. That word protected a lot of things. Practical. A farm wife needed to be healthy. Practical. Children were expected. Practical. Hard work was part of marriage. Practical. So questions about a woman's body became questions about whether she was suitable. At 18, I did not yet have language for the difference between someone asking about my health because they cared about me and someone assessing my health because of what they expected me to produce. Those two things can sound almost identical, but they do not feel identical. The first inspection happened several days later. My future husband was visiting. My mother had gone into the kitchen. He noticed my hands, Or maybe he had been told to notice them. I still do not know. Before we continue, let us know in the comments, what city are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? And when the story is over, come back and tell us what you thought. We'd love to hear your honest review. Now, let's get back to the story. He said, "Let me see." I thought he meant something I was holding. I asked what? He nodded toward my hands. So I held them out. He looked at my palms. He rubbed his thumb across one callus. Then he looked at my fingernails. He asked whether my hands ever became stiff in the winter. I told him sometimes when it was very cold. He asked whether they hurt. I said no. Then he looked at the other hand. I remember feeling heat rise into my face. Not because what he was doing was intimate in the usual sense. It was the opposite. It felt impersonal. That was what bothered me. I was standing in front of the man I would marry, and for a few moments I felt less like a young woman he loved and more like an animal someone was considering buying. I hated myself for thinking that. That thought felt disrespectful. So I pushed it away. When he finished, he said, "You have good working hands." I smiled because I thought I was supposed to. That sentence was meant as praise. For years, I tried to remember it that way. Good working hands. Strong, useful, healthy, suitable. Those words were tied together so tightly that I could not separate them. Later that evening, I asked my mother why he had wanted to look at my hands. She did not seem surprised. She said, "A man should know what kind of wife he is getting." That sentence stayed with me. What kind of wife he is getting. I asked whether I was supposed to inspect him too. My mother looked at me strangely. Not angrily. Almost as though the question itself made no sense. She said, "His family is known." That was her answer. His family is known. In other words, his suitability had already been proven through reputation. Mine was still being examined. That difference did not fully reach me until years later. 3 weeks passed. Preparations continued. Fabric was cut, food was planned. Relatives talked. My future was becoming real around me. And then came the second inspection. This one was different. It happened at his family's home. His mother was there, so was one of his older sisters. I was asked questions first. More questions about health. My monthly cycle, whether it was regular. Whether I had experienced severe pain. Whether women in my family had difficult pregnancies. I remember my entire body becoming hot. I stared down at my hands. Those same good working hands. No one had ever spoken to me so directly about those things, and now they were being discussed because I was approaching marriage. I want to be exact here. Nobody forced me to remove my clothing. Nobody performed a medical examination. I do not want to exaggerate what happened. Accuracy matters to me, but boundaries can be crossed without anything dramatic happening. Sometimes they are crossed by questions you do not believe you are allowed to refuse. That afternoon, my future husband was allowed into part of the conversation. His mother asked me to stand. I did. She told me to turn slightly. She looked at my posture, my shoulders, my hips, then my future husband looked too. The whole thing lasted less than a minute. That minute stayed with me for decades. I remember the floorboards beneath my shoes. I remember the smell of boiled coffee. I remember hearing a buggy outside and wishing whoever was arriving would come through the door fast enough to interrupt us. Nobody came. His mother asked whether I had ever injured my hip. No. My back? No. Any problem walking long distances? No. Then my future husband asked if I tired easily. I said no. He nodded. That was it. No one announced that I had passed. No one called it an inspection, but that was what it felt like. My posture, my strength, my health, my possible fertility, my usefulness, all being measured before marriage. I went home and said nothing. That is the part outsiders sometimes misunderstand about restrictive systems. People imagine that if something feels wrong, you immediately protest. But protest requires language. It requires comparison. It requires the belief that another response is possible. I did not have those things. I had discomfort. That is not the same as understanding. I knew my stomach had tightened. I knew I had wanted to leave the room. I knew I did not like being looked at that way. But I had been taught that embarrassment was part of modesty, so I interpreted my discomfort as evidence that I was a good girl. Do you see how dangerous that can become? A warning signal inside your own body gets translated into virtue. You feel shame? They call you modest. You feel fear. They call you inexperienced. You feel exposed. They call the process practical. And because the adults around you seem calm, you begin doubting the only person in the room who feels disturbed. Years later, when I spoke about this in therapy, my therapist asked me whether anyone had asked how I felt. I told her no. She asked again. Not whether anyone asked if I was healthy, Not whether anyone asked whether I could work, not whether anyone asked if I wanted to marry him. She said, "Did anyone ask how it felt to have your body evaluated?" I started crying. I had told the story calmly until then. Hands, questions. Standing, turning, health, work, everything in order. Then she asked about my feelings. That was when I understood what had been missing. Nobody had asked because my feelings were not part of the function of the practice. The goal was information, information for marriage, information for work, information about childbirth, information about suitability. My interior experience was irrelevant. That realization was more painful than the inspection itself, because it showed me how deeply I had learned to remove myself from my own story. The strange thing is that I do not remember my future husband looking pleased or cruel during either inspection. Mostly he looked serious, maybe slightly uncomfortable. I think that matters. He had been taught something too. He had been taught that marriage gave him legitimate reasons to know certain things about the woman he was choosing. He had been taught to consider health, work, children, capability. He probably thought he was being responsible. That does not mean the experience was harmless. Intent and impact are not the same thing. This is one of the hardest lessons I learned after leaving. People want simple stories. Good people, bad people, victims, villains. But systems survive precisely because ordinary people can participate in something harmful while believing they are doing what responsible people do. My mother believed she was preparing me. His mother believed she was protecting her son. My future husband believed he was making sure we were well matched. I believed obedience meant not making anyone uncomfortable. Nobody needed to wake up that morning and decide to hurt Hannah. The framework did the work for them, and that framework did not begin with us. Women had been evaluated before me. Men had been taught to evaluate before him. Mothers had answered intimate questions about daughters before mine. The pattern felt normal because it was old. Age can make a practice feel sacred. It cannot make it automatically right. After I was married, the logic behind those inspections became clearer. My body was not treated simply as mine. It was connected to everything I was expected to become. Worker, wife, mother, helper, member of the church. My health affected the household. My fertility affected the family. My obedience affected the marriage. My reputation affected both families. The system joined all of those things together, and once they were joined together, asking what I personally wanted could feel almost selfish. That is the architecture I did not understand at 18. The individual disappears beneath the role. Years later, I met other former Amish women. Some had experiences similar to mine, some did not. Some were shocked by my story. Some said their families would never have allowed anything like it. Others told me about questions, observations, warnings, and evaluations that sounded painfully familiar. That variation matters. Whenever people speak about Amish life, there is a temptation to turn hundreds of different communities into one single culture. That is not accurate. My experience was mine, but the broader pattern of girls being trained to value suitability, modesty, obedience, work, and future motherhood over personal boundaries is something I heard echoed more than once. And when similar stories repeat, I think we are allowed to ask why. There was one older woman I eventually spoke to about the second inspection. I will call her Lydia. She had been married for many years. We were shelling beans together. I told her what happened. She did not look surprised. She kept working. Then she said, "They want to know you will hold up." I asked, "Hold up to what?" She stopped for a moment. Then she looked at me, really looked at me, and said everything. That word frightened me more than a long explanation could have. Everything. Work, children, marriage, pregnancy, illness, submission, church, family, expectation, everything. Then she went back to shelling beans. That was how women sometimes told each other the truth, not openly, sideways. A sentence while working. A warning hidden inside ordinary conversation. I think Lydia knew something I did not. Being considered strong can become a trap when people use your strength as permission to keep asking more from you. You can carry it, so carry more. You survived it, so endure it again. You are a good wife, so do not complain. Strength becomes another way to erase pain. It took me years to separate those ideas. Today I believe bodily autonomy means more than preventing obvious physical force. It means recognizing that a person has the right to participate in decisions about their own body. It means questions can be inappropriate even when they are asked politely. It means cultural approval does not automatically create consent. It means an 18-year-old girl standing quietly in a room full of adults may be complying, because she cannot imagine refusal, not because she truly welcomes what is happening. That distinction changed how I understood my past. Could I have said, "I do not want you looking at me like this"? Technically, yes. Would I have believed I could say it without consequences? No, I would have believed I was hiding something. Being difficult, being immodest, embarrassing my parents, insulting the family I was about to join, possibly jeopardizing the marriage. When refusal carries that much meaning, silence becomes the easiest path, and people sometimes mistake the easiest path for consent. They are not always the same thing. If you experienced something similar in any religion, culture, family, or relationship, I want to speak directly to you now. Maybe people examined your body, maybe they evaluated your fertility, your virginity, your weight, your ability to work, your health, your usefulness. Maybe relatives discussed you in front of you, as if you were a future investment instead of a person. Maybe everybody insisted it was tradition. Maybe they said it was practical. Maybe you laughed along because you did not know what else to do. I see you, and I want you to understand something that took me years to learn. Feeling uncomfortable does not make you dishonest. Having boundaries does not mean you have something to hide. And another person's tradition does not automatically create a right to information about your body. I wish someone had told me that at 18. I wish someone had taken those hands my future husband inspected and closed them gently. I wish someone had said, "These belong to you, not because they can bake bread, not because they can milk cows, not because they can carry children, not because they can work until dark, they belong to you because they are yours." The same is true of the rest of your body. Your health is not a public ledger, your fertility is not your value, your usefulness is not the measure of whether you deserve love, and marriage should never begin with one person believing they are entitled to inspect the other. I spent years believing the strange feeling I carried from those 2 afternoons was foolishness. It was not. It was my younger self recognizing a boundary before I had learned the word boundary. That is what I wish someone had told me. Your body often knows when something is wrong before your mind has the vocabulary to explain it. Listen to that feeling. It may be the first voice you ever truly owned.